Nahuales, the shapeshifters of the night. One night in August 2012, a rancher named Antonio Reyes was checking on his cattle in a remote pasture outside San Cristobal de las Casas, Chiapas, when he heard something moving through the darkness beyond his flashlight's beam. The cattle were agitated, stamping and lowing nervously, their eyes rolling white with fear. Antonio called out, expecting to scare off a coyote or stray dog. Instead, he heard a sound that made his stomach drop, a low, wet growl that was almost human, followed by what sounded like laughter. He swung his flashlight toward the sound and caught a glimpse of something crouched at the tree line. It was too large to be a dog, wrong shape to be a jaguar, and it was wearing clothes-torn pants hanging from a body covered in dark fur. The creature's eyes reflected his light, glowing yellow-green, and in that brief moment before it vanished into the forest, Antonio saw its face. It was simultaneously animal and human, features caught between two forms, teeth too large for its mouth, a muzzle that was almost a nose. Then it was gone, moving with impossible speed through terrain that would have broken a man's legs. Antonio found 3 of his cattle dead the next morning, their throats torn out, far more meat wasted than any natural predator would leave. He knew what had visited his pasture. It was a Nahual, a shapeshifter, someone from his own village who walked as human by day but transformed into a beast at night to kill and feed. Today I'm going to tell you about one of the oldest and most terrifying beliefs in Mesoamerica, a tradition that predates the Spanish conquest and continues to be feared in rural communities across Mexico and Central America. The belief in Nahuales stretches back over 2,000 years to the pre-Hispanic civilizations of Mesoamerica, the Maya, the Aztecs, the Zapotecs, and others. The word Nahual comes from the Nahuatl language spoken by the Aztecs, derived from Nahuali, meaning to disguise oneself, or to hide. In the original indigenous belief system, Nahuales were not necessarily evil. They were powerful individuals, often priests or shamans, who could transform into their animal spirit companions, jaguars, eagles, serpents, to travel between the physical and spiritual worlds. These transformations were gifts from the gods, abilities earned through spiritual discipline and used to protect communities, to heal, to communicate with the divine. Every person was believed to have a Nahual, an animal counterpart whose fate was linked to their own, but only a few had the power to consciously become their Nahual, to shapeshift at will. When the Spanish conquered Mesoamerica in the 16th century, they encountered these beliefs and interpreted them through the lens of European witchcraft. The Catholic Church declared Nahualism a form of devil worship. Indigenous shamans who claimed shape-shifting abilities were tortured and executed. The Spanish Inquisition documented hundreds of cases of accused Nahuales, creating detailed records of confessions extracted under torture, people admitting to transforming into animals, making pacts with demons, killing livestock and children in animal form. This persecution drove Nahualism underground but didn't eliminate it. The belief evolved, absorbing Catholic elements while retaining its indigenous core. In the colonial period and beyond, Nahuales became associated with dark magic, with witches who sold their souls for power, with individuals who transformed not for spiritual purposes but to commit evil acts under the cover of animal form. According to widespread belief across Mesoamerica, becoming a Nahual requires a specific ritual, usually performed at midnight in an isolated location, a crossroads, a cave, a cemetery, or deep in the forest. The most common version involves making a pact with dark forces, calling upon pre-Christian deities, or, in the syncretic tradition, making a deal with the devil himself. The ritual typically requires the person to renounce their Christian baptism, to spit or urinate on a crucifix, and to offer something of value, blood, money, or, in the darkest versions, the promise of future victims. In exchange, they receive the power to transform into their chosen animal form. The transformation is said to be agonizing the first time, bones breaking and reforming, skin splitting to accommodate fur or feathers, the human mind forced to coexist with animal instincts. Once the pact is made, the Nahual can transform at will by performing a simple ritual, somersaulting a specific number of times, usually 7 or 13, reciting an incantation, or putting on a special animal hide. The transformation happens quickly once initiated, the human form melting and reshaping into the animal within moments. The Nahual retains human intelligence while in animal form, making them far more dangerous than natural animals. They can plan, can remember grudges, can target specific victims. The transformed Nahual is said to be nearly impossible to kill. Bullets pass through them or bounce off. Blades can't penetrate their hide. The only way to harm a Nahual in animal form is to wound them with a silver weapon, particularly one blessed by a priest, or to injure them and force them to transform back to human form, where their wounds will appear on their human body, revealing their identity. In 1987, the highland Chiapas village of San Juan Chamula experienced a series of events that terrorized the community and became one of the most documented Nahual cases in modern Mexico. The village, predominantly indigenous Tzotzil Maya, maintains strong ties to pre-Hispanic traditions despite centuries of Catholic influence. The events began in March when livestock started dying under mysterious circumstances. Sheep and goats were found in their pens with their throats torn out, far more damage done than necessary to kill them. The attacks showed intelligence. The predator would unlatch gates rather than breaking through fences, would kill multiple animals but eat almost nothing, as if the killing itself was the purpose rather than food. Villagers initially blamed dogs or coyotes, but tracking the prints around the kill sites revealed something disturbing. The tracks would begin as animal prints, large canine paws, but in certain places would transition to human footprints, bare feet, then back to animal prints. One set of tracks led from a slaughtered flock directly to the back door of a house in the village, where they ended as human footprints. The house belonged to a widow named Petrona, a woman in her 60s who lived alone and was known for her knowledge of traditional medicine and herbs. Petrona had always been somewhat isolated from the village community, practicing a form of healing that some whispered incorporated pre-Christian rituals the church would not approve of. She had been accused years before of cursing a man who had cheated her in a land dispute, and that man had subsequently died of a mysterious wasting illness. When confronted about the tracks leading to her house, Petrona became defensive and angry, cursing those who accused her and threatening that they would regret their suspicions. The livestock killings intensified. A child went missing for 3 hours, later found unharmed but unable to explain where he had been, speaking of a big dog that had led him into the forest. The village's dogs, normally vocal, would fall silent after sunset, hiding and refusing to leave their owners' homes. The situation reached a crisis point when a young man named Miguel was walking home late one night and was attacked by what he described as an enormous black dog that walked on its hind legs like a human. The creature bit his arm before he managed to escape, and the wound was severe, deep punctures that showed signs of infection despite treatment. Miguel's family took him to the village healer, not Petrona, but an elderly man named Don Aurelio, who was respected for both his traditional knowledge and his strong Catholic faith. Don Aurelio examined the wound and declared it a Nahual's bite. He said the creature had marked Miguel, would return to finish the kill unless protective measures were taken. He performed a cleansing ceremony, made protective amulets, and instructed Miguel's family to keep watch. He also quietly spread word through the village that the Nahual needed to be identified and stopped before it killed someone. 2 nights later, a group of village men, led by Miguel's older brother, decided to keep watch over the livestock pens and catch whatever was killing the animals. They armed themselves with machetes, a few old hunting rifles, and Don Aurelio's blessings. Around midnight, they heard the animals panicking. A large shape moved through the darkness between the pens, something that moved like a dog but was far too large, with eyes that reflected their flashlights like polished coins. The men opened fire. The creature howled a sound that was part animal, part horribly human, and fled into the darkness. The men tracked blood spatter, expecting to find a dead animal. Instead, the blood trail led through the village streets and ended at Petrona's door. They pounded on the door, demanding she open it. When she finally appeared, she was wearing a nightgown, and her left shoulder was bleeding through the fabric, a bullet wound in exactly the location where one of the men had shot the creature. What happened next depends on who tells the story. The official police report states that Petrona was taken to the hospital in San Cristobal, where she was treated for a gunshot wound she claimed resulted from an accident. She was released and quietly moved away from San Juan Chamula, going to live with relatives in another state. The livestock killing stopped immediately after her departure. The unofficial village account is darker. They say Petrona confessed under interrogation by the village elders, admitting she had become a Nahual 20 years earlier after making a pact at a sacred cave. She said the transformations had become addictive, that the power and freedom of animal form called to her, that she could no longer control the violent impulses that came with the shape. They say the village conducted a traditional banishment ceremony, that Petrona was forced to break her pact through a painful ritual involving fire and blessed salt, and that she left the village no longer able to transform but spiritually broken. No one from San Juan Chamula speaks of her now, as if mentioning her name might call her back. The shapeshifter walks among us, unknowable and deadly, a predator wearing human skin. In the old beliefs, Nahuales were protectors, spiritual warriors. In the modern understanding, shaped by centuries of syncretism and fear, they are witches who have traded their humanity for power, who have made pacts with darkness that allow them to escape the limitations of human form and indulge the violent impulses civilized society demands we suppress. In rural villages across Mesoamerica, when livestock die mysteriously, when strange tracks appear that begin as animal and end as human, when someone appears with unexplained wounds, the whisper spreads. Nahual, doors are locked before sunset, children are kept inside, protective prayers are said with extra fervor, because everyone knows that Nahuales are real, are dangerous, and are impossible to identify until it's too late. In the rural darkness, when you hear something that sounds almost like footsteps but not quite, when you see eyes reflecting light from the forest edge, when your animals panic for no visible reason, remember the Nahuales. Remember that some of your neighbors are not what they seem, and pray you never see them transform. Curupira, the guardian with backward feet. One afternoon in November 2007, 3 illegal loggers were working deep in the Amazon rainforest near Manaus, Brazil, cutting mahogany trees they had no permit to touch when they heard a child laughing. The sound came from somewhere to their left, high and playful, echoing through the dense vegetation. The men stopped their chainsaws and called out, concerned that a child had wandered dangerously far from any village. The laughter came again, closer now, circling around them. Then they saw him, a small figure moving through the undergrowth about 30 meters away. Pale skin, wild red hair, moving with impossible speed through terrain that would have tripped an adult. The oldest logger, a man named Paulo, felt his blood turn cold. He grabbed his companions and hissed one word, Curupira. They dropped their equipment and ran back toward their truck, following the trail they had marked that morning. But the trail was wrong. The blazes on the trees were there, but they led in a direction that felt off, twisting deeper into the forest rather than toward the road. Paulo's compass spun wildly, giving nonsense readings. Behind them, the laughter continued, sometimes near, sometimes distant, always herding them forward. They ran for 6 hours, exhausted and terrified, until they stumbled onto a highway, but it was the wrong highway, 40 kilometers from where they had started, in the opposite direction from their truck. When they returned the next day with police, they couldn't find their equipment, their cut trees, or even the clearing where they had been working. The forest had swallowed all evidence of their trespass. Paulo swore he would never log illegally again. The Curupira, the ancient guardian of the Amazon, had delivered his warning. Today I'm going to tell you about one of Brazil's oldest and most enduring legends, a a supernatural protector whose story has been told for over 500 years. The Curupira predates European contact with South America. Indigenous peoples of the Amazon, the Tupi, Guarani, and dozens of other nations told stories of this forest spirit long before Portuguese colonizers arrived in 1500. The name Curupira comes from the Tupi language, likely derived from kuru, body, and pira, child, literally meaning child's body, though some linguists translate it as covered with blisters or scarred skin, referring to the spirit's appearance. The earliest written account of the Curupira comes from 1560, when the Portuguese priest José de Anchieta documented indigenous beliefs in a letter to his superiors in Portugal. He described the Curupira as a demon that the Indians greatly fear, that lives in the forest and attacks and kills those who go to hunt without permission. Anchieta noted the creature's most distinctive feature: feet that face backward, with heels in front and toes pointing behind. The Jesuit priests who followed Anchieta recorded more details over the following centuries. They described the Curupira as appearing like a young boy, no taller than 4 feet, with bright red or orange hair covering his head and body, pale or copper-colored skin, and eyes that glowed green or yellow in darkness. Some accounts said his ears were extremely large, able to hear whispers from kilometers away. Most striking were those backward feet tracks that appeared to be going in the opposite direction from the creature's actual movement, a natural defense against trackers. Indigenous traditions held that the Curupira was not evil but a guardian, a protector of the forest and its animals. He punished those who hunted wastefully, who killed pregnant animals or young offspring, who took more than they needed, or who showed disrespect to the forest. Those who hunted respectfully, who asked permission of the forest spirits, who killed only what they needed and used every part of the animal, had nothing to fear from the Curupira. Some tribes even left offerings for him: tobacco, cachaça, sugarcane, liquor, or food in exchange for safe passage and good hunting. The Curupira's primary weapon is misdirection. His backward feet create tracks that lead pursuers in the wrong direction. What appears to be the path forward is actually backward. What seems to be an exit leads deeper into the forest. Hunters following these tracks find themselves hopelessly lost in terrain they thought they knew, walking in circles, unable to find familiar landmarks. But the Curupira's arsenal extends far beyond false footprints. He can perfectly mimic human voices, calling to lost people using the voices of their friends or family members, leading them away from safety. He imitates animal sounds, the cry of a tapir, the call of rare birds to lure hunters into dangerous areas. His laughter, described as high and childlike but with an unsettling quality, echoes through the forest from multiple directions simultaneously, creating confusion and disorientation. The Curupira can manipulate the forest itself. Trees that were there moments ago vanish. Paths close behind travelers. Rivers change course. The forest becomes a maze that actively works against intruders. Time behaves strangely in the Curupira's domain. People think they've been lost for hours only to discover days have passed, or they wander for what feels like days only to emerge minutes after they entered. Experienced hunters and forest dwellers recognize the signs of Curupira activity. Unexplained laughter when no children are present, tracks that make no sense, compasses that spin wildly, an oppressive feeling of being watched, and animals behaving strangely, fleeing an area en masse, or gathering to observe humans in ways they never normally would. When these signs appear, the wise immediately leave the forest, abandoning whatever they were hunting or harvesting. Those who ignore the warnings face escalating consequences. The Curupira might first create minor inconveniences, hiding tools, scattering supplies, causing small injuries. If the trespasser persists, the tricks become more serious, leading them near dangerous animals or into areas with poisonous plants. In the most severe cases, the Curupira leads people so deep into the forest they are never seen again, their bodies absorbed into the jungle they violated. In 1983, a logging company began operations in the Tapajós National Forest in Pará State, cutting deep into primary rainforests that had never been commercially logged. The company, which I'll call Madeira Tropical to protect identities, brought in workers from southern Brazil who had no knowledge of Amazon traditions and no respect for indigenous beliefs about the forest. The trouble began within the first week. Workers reported hearing children laughing in the forest while they operated their chainsaws. When they investigated, they found nothing. But the laughter continued, seeming to come from all directions. Equipment began to malfunction, chainsaws would die inexplicably, trucks would have flat tires on all four wheels overnight, bulldozers would be found the next morning with their fuel tanks drained, though the caps were still locked. The foreman, a man named Gilberto who had logged throughout Brazil without incident, dismissed these problems as coincidence or sabotage by environmental activists. He increased security and pushed the workers harder. The incidents escalated. A worker named Jose was operating a chainsaw when he heard his young daughter calling for help from the forest. Panicked, he dropped his saw and ran toward the sound, calling her name. His co-workers tried to stop him, shouting that his daughter was in school hundreds of kilometers away, but Jose didn't listen. He ran into the forest following the voice. They searched for him for 3 days before finding him 15 kilometers from the logging site, wandering in circles, dehydrated and incoherent. When he recovered enough to speak, he kept insisting his daughter had been lost in the forest, that he'd been following her voice, that she had stayed just ahead of him no matter how fast he ran. A bulldozer operator named Fernando reported seeing a small, red-haired child standing in the path he'd just cleared. The child was laughing and pointing at the ground. When Fernando looked down, he saw he was about to drive over a massive ant nest, the kind whose ants deliver agonizingly painful stings. He swerved to avoid it, and his bulldozer's blade struck a hidden rock, damaging the equipment. When he looked back, the child had vanished. The indigenous workers the company had hired as guides began refusing to enter certain areas. They warned Gilberto that they had seen Curupira sign backward footprints in the mud, inexplicable animal behavior, trees with scratch marks too high for any known animal to reach. They said the forest was angry, that the Curupira was defending his territory, that the logging needed to stop or people would die. Gilberto fired the indigenous workers for spreading superstitious nonsense and brought in more equipment and more laborers. That's when the disappearances began. A worker named Roberto went into the forest to relieve himself and never returned. Search parties found his tracks leading away from the worksite, but after 50 meters, the tracks simply ended, as if he had been lifted into the air. Another worker, Manuel, vanished overnight from his tent in the workers' camp. His tent was undisturbed, his belongings still inside, but Manuel was gone. His footprints led from the tent into the forest, growing farther apart as if he had been running. The tracks terminated at a massive ceiba tree, circling it 3 times before disappearing. The workers began deserting the site. Within 2 weeks, Gilberto had lost half his labor force. Those who remained were jumpy and terrified, refusing to work after 4 p.m., clustering together and never going anywhere alone. The company's owners, facing mounting losses and negative publicity, decided to abandon the project. When workers returned to retrieve their equipment, they found everything overrun by vegetation, trees, and vines had grown with impossible speed, reclaiming the cleared areas. Machinery was rusted as if decades had passed rather than weeks. And everywhere they looked, in every patch of mud, they saw them, small footprints with the toes pointing backward, leading in circles around the abandoned equipment. Roberto and Manuel were never found. Local indigenous communities say the Curupira took them, that they had ignored too many warnings and disrespected the forest too deeply. The land where Madeira Tropical attempted to log remains untouched. No company has tried to work there since. The area has a reputation now among loggers, whispered about in bars and work camps, the place where the Curupira drives intruders mad. Over centuries of coexistence with the Curupira, indigenous peoples and traditional forest dwellers developed a code of conduct to avoid his wrath. These rules remain observed by those who depend on the Amazon for survival. Never hunt or harvest on Fridays or Catholic holy days. The Curupira is said to be particularly vigilant on these days. Always ask permission before entering the forest, speaking aloud to the spirits, explaining your purpose and promising to take only what you need. Leave offerings at the forest edge. Tobacco is traditional, but cachaça, food, or even simple gifts like colorful cloth are acceptable. When hunting, never kill pregnant females or young animals. Never take more game than you can use. Use every part of any animal you kill. Wasting meat offends the Curupira deeply. If you accidentally kill an animal you didn't intend to, apologize aloud to the forest and leave the carcass as an offering rather than abandoning it to rot. If you hear laughter in the forest, never investigate. If you hear voices calling your name, especially voices of people you know aren't nearby, don't answer and leave immediately. If you find backward footprints, turn around and go home. You've entered the Curupira's active territory. If your compass stops working or animals behave strangely, leave the forest immediately. Should you realize you're lost and suspect the Curupira is involved, traditional wisdom offers several remedies. Turn your clothes inside out. This confuses the Curupira's magic, breaking his hold on you. Walk backward yourself, matching the direction of his footprints to counter his misdirection. Speak respectfully to the forest, apologizing for any offense and promising to respect the rules in the future. Leave an offering and retreat immediately if you regain your sense of direction. Never, under any circumstances, threaten or mock the Curupira. Stories tell of hunters who fired guns at the spirit, only to have the bullets loop back and strike them instead. Others who captured animals under the Curupira's protection found those animals impossible to kill. Knives wouldn't cut, bullets wouldn't penetrate, and were then hunted themselves by an enraged guardian. The Curupira remains relevant in contemporary Brazil. As the Amazon faces unprecedented destruction from logging, mining, and agricultural expansion, reports of Curupira encounters have actually increased. Environmental activists sometimes invoke the Curupira's protection, arguing that the forest has its own defenses against those who would destroy it. In 2015, a mining operation in Roraima experienced a series of accidents and disappearances that workers attributed to the Curupira. Heavy equipment failed mysteriously. Workers became lost between their barracks and the mine entrance, a distance of less than 100 meters. Several miners reported seeing a small, red-haired figure watching them from the forest edge. After 3 workers disappeared within a month, their bodies never recovered. The mining company suspended operations, blaming environmental factors and worker safety concerns. Indigenous rights activists have adopted the Curupira as a symbol of resistance against deforestation. Murals in Brazilian cities depict the spirit standing defiantly before logging equipment. Environmental protests feature people in Curupira costumes, red hair, backward boots, as a reminder that the forest will defend itself against destruction. Scientists and researchers working in the Amazon often report strange experiences consistent with Curupira legends, though they typically attribute these to natural causes, disorientation from similar-looking terrain, misidentification of animal sounds, the psychological effects of isolation in dense forest. Yet even skeptical researchers admit that the Amazon is a place where your senses can deceive you, where the forest seems to have intelligence and intention, where you can feel utterly lost despite having GPS and satellite phones. Today, when illegal loggers work deep in the Amazon, they still listen for laughter where no children should be. When hunters venture into protected areas, they still watch for backward footprints. When miners push into pristine rainforest, they still fear becoming lost in a maze that shouldn't exist. Because the Curupira is still there, still guarding, still leading intruders deeper into the green darkness until they understand that some places were never meant for human exploitation. The forest remembers, the Curupira never forgets, and those who disrespect the Amazon will find themselves walking in circles, following false tracks, hearing laughter that comes from nowhere and everywhere, until they either learn respect or disappear entirely into the green cathedral that brooks no desecration. He is watching still, red hair blazing like fire, feet pointing the wrong way, leading the destroyers astray, protecting the ancient wilderness with tricks and terror and the absolute certainty that the forest will endure long after those who sought to tame it have become lost stories themselves. Corpo Seco, the corpse the earth refused. One night in April 1996, a priest named Father Sebastião was walking back to his church in the rural town of Várzea Grande, Mato Grosso, after visiting a dying parishioner, when he heard something moving behind him on the dirt road. The sound was wrong footsteps, but stiff and dragging, like someone walking on broken legs. Father Sebastião turned and saw a figure approaching through the darkness about 20 meters away. Even in the dim moonlight, he could see the figure's movements were unnatural, jerking and rigid, as if the body didn't bend properly at the joints. As it came closer, Father Sebastião's flashlight beam caught the figure's face, and he felt his breath stop. The face was a dried husk, skin pulled tight over the skull like leather left too long in the sun, eye sockets deep and dark, mouth open in a permanent grimace revealing yellowed teeth. The figure wore the tattered remains of burial clothes, and its hands, reaching toward him, were skeletal claws wrapped in parchment-thin skin. Father Sebastião knew immediately what stalked him. He had heard the stories all his life, but never believed them until that moment. He raised the silver crucifix he wore around his neck and began praying loudly, backing toward the church that was now visible ahead. The creature stopped, its dried mouth working silently as if trying to speak or scream. When Father Sebastião's foot touched the consecrated ground of the churchyard, the creature turned and fled with that same stiff, broken gait, disappearing into the darkness of the surrounding fields. Father Sebastião spent the rest of the night praying in his church, doors locked, every candle lit. He had encountered the Corpo Seco, the dry corpse, the walking dead man so evil that even the earth rejected his body. Today I'm going to tell you about one of rural Brazil's most terrifying legends, a curse that transforms the wicked into undead abominations. The legend of the Corpo Seco exists throughout rural Brazil, particularly in the interior regions of Minas Gerais, São Paulo, Goiás, and Mato Grosso. Unlike many folk tales with ancient indigenous origins, the Corpo Seco legend appears to be a syncretic creation, blending Catholic concepts of sin and divine judgment with African and indigenous beliefs about the relationship between the dead and the earth. The core belief is consistent across regions. When a person commits sins so terrible that they forfeit all humanity, when they die without repentance or redemption, the earth itself rejects their body. The ground will not accept their corpse. If buried, the body is expelled. Witnesses describe graves that split open, coffins pushed to the surface, bodies left exposed on the ground as if the soil had vomited them up. Fire cannot consume them, their flesh refuses to burn, no matter how hot the flames. Water will not dissolve them. The body remains preserved in a state of desiccated decay, dried out like leather, mummified but mobile. These rejected corpses rise as Corpo Seco, driven by insatiable hunger, rage at their condition, and the compulsion to spread suffering. They are neither fully dead nor alive, caught in a state of cursed undeath, wandering the rural darkness, attacking the living, particularly targeting those who remind them of their former lives or who exhibit the same sins that led to their damnation. What sins merit this terrible fate? The stories are remarkably consistent. Extreme cruelty, particularly toward family members. The most common origin story involves a son who beats, starves, or murders. His own mother. Matricide is considered the ultimate sin in Brazilian folk culture, an act so contrary to natural order that it breaks the covenant between human and earth. Other mortal sins include killing children, extreme sacrilege against the church, making pacts with the devil, and lives devoted entirely to causing suffering with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. The Corpo Seco is different from typical zombies or revenants in other cultures. These creatures retain fragments of their human intelligence, enough to remember what they were and to suffer from what they've become. They can recognize places and people from their lives. They understand they are cursed, rejected by earth and heaven alike, and that understanding fuels their rage. They are abominations aware of their own monstrosity, which makes them even more dangerous and pitiable. The most widely told origin story of a specific Corpo Seco concerns a man named João, who lived in rural Minas Gerais in the late 1800s. João was known throughout his region as a man of exceptional cruelty. He beat his wife until she fled, taking their children. He cheated his neighbors, stole from the poor, and showed particular viciousness toward animals, torturing and killing them for entertainment. But his greatest crime was against his own mother. João's mother, a widow named Dona Maria, had given everything to raise him, working herself nearly to death to provide for her only child. As she aged and could no longer work, João treated her with contempt. He begrudged her every mouthful of food, every space she occupied in his house. Neighbors heard him screaming at her, calling her worthless, a burden, telling her she should have died years ago. The situation deteriorated until João began actively starving his mother. He would eat in front of her, giving her nothing, or leave out spoiled food and mock her when she was hungry enough to eat it. Dona Maria grew skeletal, her body consuming itself. She begged her son for mercy. She asked neighbors for help, but this was an era when family matters were private, and few dared interfere between a son and his mother. Finally, one winter night, Dona Maria died of starvation in João's house, in a room where he had locked her to muffle her cries for food. When neighbors discovered what had happened, they were horrified. The local priest refused to give João absolution, declaring him beyond redemption. João showed no remorse. At his mother's funeral, he laughed and said he was glad to be free of the burden. He spat on her grave. The townspeople shunned him after that. No one would speak to him, sell to him, or acknowledge his existence. João lived alone in his house, growing more bitter and hateful. 2 years after his mother's death, João himself died, found in his house, apparently of a heart attack, his face frozen in a grimace of terror. They buried him in the town cemetery, but João's grave refused to stay closed. The first night after burial, the gravediggers found the soil disturbed, the coffin partially exposed. They reburied him, packing the earth down firmly. The next morning, the grave had split open completely, the coffin lid cracked, and João's body was gone. 3 nights later, a farmer found João's corpse walking along the road toward town. The body was dried out, mummified, moving with stiff mechanical movements. The farmer ran and gathered others. When a group returned to the location, they found João's dried corpse, trying to dig up his mother's grave, his desiccated hands clawing at the earth, his dried mouth working soundlessly. They tried to restrain him, but the corpse displayed impossible strength, throwing off multiple men. It took blessed rope and prayers to finally subdue the creature. The priest ordered João's body taken far from the cemetery to unconsecrated ground deep in the forest. They tried to burn the corpse, but it would not catch fire. The flames touched the dried flesh and simply went out. Holy water made it smoke and writhe, but caused no lasting damage. Finally, they bound the body with chains blessed by the priest and buried it in a deep pit far from any holy ground, marked with no cross or stone, hoping the isolation would contain it. But the Corpo Seco of João continued to appear. Travelers on roads near where he was buried reported seeing a dried corpse walking in the darkness. Farmers found livestock killed and partially devoured, the wounds showing the marks of human teeth but dried and withered flesh around the bites. Children who stayed out after dark disappeared, some found days later, terrified and incoherent, speaking of a dried monster that had chased them. The appearances continued for decades. Some claimed João's Corpo Seco still walks the night in Minas Gerais, an eternal warning of what awaits those who betray the sacred bond between mother and child. Across countless accounts, the Corpo Seco is described with remarkable consistency. The body is desiccated, all moisture gone, skin pulled tight over bones like leather or parchment. The face is skull-like but still recognizable as once human. The eyes are either empty sockets or dried, sunken orbs that sometimes show a faint glow. The mouth is often stuck open in a permanent scream or grimace, revealing dried gums and yellowed teeth. The body wears whatever it was buried in, now tattered and rotting. Movement is stiff and unnatural, the joints don't bend properly, giving the creature a jerking, mechanical gait. Despite this awkwardness, the corpo seco can move with surprising speed when attacking. It possesses supernatural strength, able to tear through doors, lift grown men, and kill livestock with its bare hands. The creature is driven by insatiable hunger. It attacks both animals and humans, biting and tearing with its teeth, drinking blood and consuming flesh in a desperate attempt to restore moisture to its dried body. But nothing satisfies this hunger. The corpo seco can feed endlessly without finding relief, the curse ensuring that it remains perpetually starving. The corpo seco is active only at night, unable to tolerate daylight. Some accounts say the sun's rays cause it pain, forcing it to seek shelter in caves, abandoned buildings, or deep forest. Others claim that daylight makes the creature rigid and immobile, essentially a corpse again until darkness returns. Holy ground repels the corpo seco. It cannot enter churches, cemeteries, or blessed areas. The sight of religious symbols, crosses, holy water, blessed objects causes it pain and drives it back. Prayers, particularly when spoken by priests or genuinely faithful individuals, create barriers the creature cannot cross. Salt blessed by a priest can create lines the corpo seco cannot cross. Fire, while it won't destroy the creature, can drive it away temporarily. The creature retains enough intelligence to recognize people and places from its former life. It is drawn to locations where it committed its sins, to people who knew it, to family members. Some accounts describe corpo secos returning to their former homes, trying to enter, scratching at doors and windows, calling out in dried whispers to those inside. This makes the creature particularly terrifying for families of the cursed, knowing that your father, brother, or husband might return as a dried monster seeking entry to the home. In 1978, the Silva family in a rural area outside Cuiabá, Mato Grosso, experienced a 3-month nightmare that became one of the most documented corpo seco cases. The patriarch of the family, Antonio Silva, had died 6 months earlier. Antonio had been a violent, cruel man who beat his wife and children, ran his small farm through intimidation, and was known for sadistic treatment of anyone who crossed him. He had kicked his elderly father out of the house in the man's final years, refusing him shelter or help. When Antonio died of a stroke, few mourned him. The Silva family, his widow Rosa, and their adult children Miguel, Ana, and Carlos began to rebuild their lives, finally free from Antonio's tyranny. The farm, previously failing under his mismanagement, started to prosper. For the first time in years, the family knew peace. Then the incidents began. Rosa woke one night to scratching at her bedroom window. When she looked, she saw a face pressed against the glass, dried, skeletal, but recognizable. It was Antonio's face. She screamed, and her sons came running. By the time they reached her room, the face was gone, but they found deep scratches in the wooden window frame, made by what looked like dried fingernails. The next night, their dogs went wild, barking at the tree line near the house. Miguel went outside with a flashlight and saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest, stiff, dried, wearing what looked like the burial suit they had put on his father's corpse. The figure began walking toward the house with that characteristic jerking gait. Miguel ran inside, and the family barricaded the doors. They heard footsteps circling the house, heard scratching at the doors and walls, heard a dry voice calling their names, Antonio's voice, but ruined, like someone speaking with a throat full of sand. The siege continued until dawn. When light came, the sound stopped. The family found tracks in the dirt around the house, human footprints, but the spacing was wrong, too far apart and too close together, as if the walker's legs didn't bend properly. They also found a partial handprint on the wall, and when they looked closely, they could see it was dried, leathered flesh, not living skin. The family consulted Father Osvaldo, the local priest. When they described what was happening, he became grim. He knew the stories. He explained that Antonio's sins, the violence, the cruelty, the abandonment of his own father had been severe enough to trigger the curse. The earth had rejected his body, and now he walked as corpo seco. Father Osvaldo blessed the house, placing crosses at every entrance, sprinkling holy water around the property, and teaching the family protective prayers. That night, Antonio's corpse returned, but now it could not approach within 10 meters of the house. It stood at the edge of the blessed perimeter, the dried mouth working, the skeletal hands reaching, but unable to advance. The family watched from the windows as the creature circled the property all night, testing the boundaries, never able to cross. This pattern continued for weeks. Every night, the corpo seco returned, unable to enter but refusing to leave. The family couldn't leave the property after dark if they stepped beyond the blessed boundary. They would be vulnerable. They became prisoners in their own home. Father Osvaldo tried exorcism, tried prayers for the dead, tried commanding the spirit to rest in God's name. Nothing worked. The corpo seco had no soul left to save, no spirit that could be commanded. It was pure, cursed flesh, sustained by malevolence and the earth's rejection. Finally, Rosa made a decision. She gathered her children and told them they would move away, abandon the farm, start new lives somewhere Antonio had never been. They couldn't destroy the curse, but they could escape it. Within a week, the Silva family had sold the property at a significant loss. Once potential buyers learned about the nightly visitor and relocated to Sao Paulo. The new owners lasted 3 months before they too fled. The farm stood abandoned for years. Eventually, a developer bought the land cheap and bulldozed everything, building a small residential complex. Whether the curse remained tied to the location or whether it followed the Silva family to Sao Paulo, no one knows for certain. Rosa Silva died in 2005 without ever speaking publicly about what happened. Her children refuse interviews to this day. Reports of corpo seco encounters continue throughout rural Brazil. In 2010, workers building a road through Goiás discovered an unmarked grave when their equipment broke through into a buried chamber. Inside was a preserved corpse, dried and leathery, bound with chains that had rusted through. Local elders identified the location as a known burial site for a man who had murdered his wife and children in the 1,940 seconds. The workers, against advice, moved the body to a proper cemetery. Within a week, several of them reported seeing a dried corpse following them after dark. The body was removed from the cemetery, reportedly having split its grave open and reburied in its original location with new chains and religious blessings. The sightings stopped. The legend serves multiple cultural functions. It's a moral warning about the consequences of extreme sin, particularly sins against family. It reinforces Catholic teachings about redemption. Those who die unrepentant face terrible fates. It provides explanation for the mysterious disappearance of livestock and occasional persons in rural areas where wild animals, accidents, and simple getting lost can all be deadly. But for those who have encountered a corpo seco, who have seen the dried corpse walking in moonlight, who have heard the sandy whisper calling their name, the legend is terrifyingly real. They know that some evils are so profound that death provides no escape, that the earth itself can reject those who have rejected all decency and humanity. And on moonless nights, in the deep countryside where electric lights are few and the darkness is complete, if you hear stiff footsteps dragging through the dirt, if you see a figure moving with mechanical jerks and rigid limbs, if you catch a glimpse of a face dried like leather pulled over bone, run to holy ground. Find a church, a blessed home, anywhere the sacred can protect you. Because the corpo seco is abroad, and it is always hungry, always desperate, always seeking to share its suffering with the living. The curse continues. The earth still rejects the truly wicked, and their dried corpses still walk. Eternal warnings that some sins echo beyond the grave. El Sombrerón, the man in the giant hat. One night in March 2008, a nurse named Patricia Gomez was walking home from her shift at a rural clinic outside Popayan, Colombia, when she noticed someone following her. She could hear footsteps behind her on the dirt road, matching her pace exactly. When she walked faster, the footsteps accelerated. When she slowed, they slowed. She turned to look, but the road behind her appeared empty in the darkness. Still, the footsteps continued, clear and deliberate. Then she saw him standing perhaps 20 meters away at the edge of her flashlight's beam. A small figure, no taller than a child. But the proportions were all wrong. The body was too solid, too adult. And the hat. The hat was massive, impossibly wide, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the light around it. She couldn't see a face beneath the brim, only darkness. Patricia ran. Behind her, she heard those footsteps, never hurrying, never slowing, but always keeping the same distance. She ran for 15 minutes straight until she reached her house, burst through the door, and locked it behind her. Through the window, she saw the figure standing at the edge of her yard, perfectly still, the enormous hat, unmistakable, even in the darkness. It stood there for 3 hours, not moving, just watching. Patricia didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that, because every night when she looked out her window, he was there, El Sombrerón, the stalker who drives his victims to madness simply by refusing to leave. Today I'm going to tell you about one of rural Colombia's most psychologically terrifying entities, a creature that doesn't attack with claws or teeth, but with relentless, maddening presence. El Sombrerón is reported throughout rural Colombia, particularly in the departments of Cauca, Nariño, Huila, and Tolima. The legend also exists in variations across Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, but the Colombian version has distinctive characteristics that set it apart. The entity is consistently described as a short figure, usually no more than 4 feet tall, dressed entirely in dark clothing. But the defining feature is always the hat, a sombrero so large it dwarfs the figure wearing it, with a brim that extends far beyond normal proportions. No one ever clearly sees El Sombrerón's face. The massive hat casts a shadow so deep that the area beneath remains in darkness, even in bright moonlight or when flashlights shine directly at it. Those who get close enough and survive report the sensation of eyes watching from that shadow, but never actual features. Some say his face doesn't exist, that beneath the hat is only more darkness, or a void, or something so terrible the mind refuses to process it. El Sombrerón doesn't speak. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't physically attack. Instead, he follows. Once he selects a victim, he begins stalking them relentlessly. He appears behind them on roads, stands outside their homes at night, watches from a distance during the day. He never approaches closer than a certain distance, usually about 10 to 20 meters, but he never falls farther behind. He is simply there, always there, a silent presence that refuses to leave. The psychological effect is devastating. Victims become paranoid, constantly looking over their shoulders. They can't sleep, knowing he's standing outside. They can't work, can't focus, their minds consumed by the knowledge that he's watching. The stalking continues night after night, week after week. The victim's mental state deteriorates. Insomnia, anxiety, paranoia escalate into full psychological breaks. Some victims die from the stress, their hearts giving out from sustained terror and sleeplessness. Others go mad, institutionalized or withdrawn into catatonic states. A few simply vanish, last seen walking toward the figure as if in a trance, never to return. What determines who El Sombrerón targets? The accounts vary, but patterns emerge. He often follows people who are alone at night, particularly travelers on isolated roads. He seems attracted to those who have violated social taboos, women who've been unfaithful, men who've abandoned their families, people who've shown cruelty to others. Some stories say he hunts those who've made promises they didn't keep, particularly promises made to the dead. Others claim he appears to people who are dying, that his presence is both cause and effect. You see him because death is near, and death is near because you've seen him. In 1993, a school teacher named Gabriel Torres in the village of Silvia, Cauca, experienced a 3-month ordeal with El Sombreron that became legendary in the region. Gabriel was a respected man in his 30s, married with 2 children, known for his dedication to his students and his community involvement. He had no enemies, no scandals, no obvious reason to attract supernatural attention. The stalking began on a Thursday night in July. Gabriel was returning from a teachers' meeting in a nearby town, walking the 2-kilometer path between the main road and his village. About halfway home, he had the distinct sensation of being followed. He turned and saw the figure small, dressed in black, wearing that impossibly large hat, standing motionless in the middle of the path behind him. Gabriel called out, asking who was there. The figure didn't respond, didn't move. Gabriel continued walking, faster now. When he looked back again, the figure had moved closer, maintaining the same distance. It followed him all the way to his village, stopping only at the edge of the settlement, as if an invisible line prevented it from going farther. Gabriel told his wife Marta about the strange encounter. She dismissed it as his imagination or perhaps someone playing a prank. But that night, Gabriel couldn't sleep. Around midnight, he looked out the window and saw the figure standing at the edge of their property, barely visible in the darkness except for the distinctive silhouette of the oversized hat. Gabriel watched for an hour. The figure never moved, never looked away from the house. The next night, it was there again. Gabriel began losing sleep, getting up every few hours to check if the figure was still there. It always was, standing in exactly the same spot, facing the house. During the day, Gabriel felt fine, dismissing his nighttime fears as overreaction. But as soon as the sun set, the dread would return, and he would find himself compulsively checking the windows, knowing what he would see. After a week of this, Gabriel's behavior began to change. His students noticed he seemed distracted, tired, jumpy. At home, he snapped at his children over minor things. Marta grew concerned, suggesting he see a doctor. Gabriel insisted he was fine, just stressed from work. But privately, he was unraveling. The lack of sleep was affecting his judgment, his memory, his emotions. And every night, the figure was there. Gabriel tried confronting it. He went outside one night, armed with a machete, and approached the figure. As he got within about 15 meters, a wave of wrongness washed over him, a visceral, instinctive terror that bypassed all rational thought. His body simply refused to go closer. He shouted at the figure, demanding it leave, threatening it. The figure didn't react. Gabriel retreated to his house, shaking, humiliated by his own fear. He tried ignoring it, covering the window so he couldn't see out. But knowing the figure was there was almost worse than seeing it. His imagination filled in the gaps. Was it closer now? Had it moved? Was it at the door? Gabriel would tear the coverings down to check, finding the figure in exactly the same position, which somehow made it worse. The stalking was so consistent, so methodical, it felt intentional, intelligent, malicious. By the 3rd week, Gabriel was barely functional. He called in sick to work. He stopped eating properly. The insomnia was severe. He might manage an hour or 2 of fitful sleep before jerking awake, certain he'd heard something, rushing to the window to confirm the figure was still there. Marta begged him to seek help. Gabriel's father, a traditional healer familiar with local folklore, recognized the symptoms immediately. Gabriel had been targeted by El Sombreron. The father performed several protective rituals. He blessed the house with holy water and herbs. He made amulets for Gabriel to wear. He tried confronting the figure himself, using prayers and invocations passed down through generations. Nothing worked. The figure remained, implacable, patient, eternal. Gabriel's father told Marta to prepare for the worst. Once El Sombrerón began stalking someone, he rarely stopped until his victim was dead or mad. In the final week, Gabriel's deterioration accelerated. He stopped sleeping entirely, sitting up all night watching the figure. He began muttering to himself, conversations with no one. He claimed he could hear the figure calling his name, though Marta heard nothing. He said he understood now why the figure was there, that he deserved this, though he couldn't or wouldn't explain what he meant. He spoke of sins, of debts unpaid, of something terrible he'd done that he'd never told anyone. On the 93rd night of the stalking, Gabriel walked out of his house at 3 a.m. and walked directly toward the figure. Marta woke and found him gone. She ran outside and saw Gabriel approaching El Sombrerón, who stood unmoving in his usual spot. Marta screamed for Gabriel to come back. He didn't respond, didn't even look at her. He walked right up to the figure, stopping just an arm's length away, staring into the darkness beneath that massive hat. Then Gabriel turned and continued walking past the figure, out of the village, into the darkness beyond. Marta tried to follow, but the moment she got within 20 meters of El Sombrerón, that same overwhelming terror hit her, stopping her in her tracks. She watched helplessly as her husband walked into the night, the small figure turning to follow him at the same measured distance, hat bobbing slightly with each step. Search parties found no trace of Gabriel Torres. He had vanished completely in terrain that the searchers knew intimately. Some claimed to see a small figure with an enormous hat watching from a distance during the search, but whenever anyone approached, the figure would melt into the landscape. The searches were eventually abandoned. Gabriel was declared dead after 7 years. Marta never remarried. She told people that Gabriel wasn't dead. Not exactly, he was walking still, somewhere in the darkness, with El Sombrerón always behind him, forever stalked, forever fleeing. What makes El Sombrerón particularly terrifying is his methodology. He doesn't need to touch his victims to destroy them. The stalking itself is the weapon, psychological warfare that wears down defenses until the mind breaks. Every aspect of his behavior seems calculated to maximize distress. The distance he maintains is perfect, close enough to be unmistakably real and threatening, far enough that confrontation is difficult. The silence is maddening. Victims long for him to speak, to make demands, to explain why, but he never does. The consistency is crushing, knowing he'll be there every single night, in the same spot, never early, never late, never missing a night. The fact that only the victim can see him clearly adds another layer of horror. Others might catch glimpses, might feel uneasy, but the full manifestation appears only to the targeted person. This isolation compounds the psychological damage family and friends can't fully understand, can't offer meaningful help because they don't experience the full weight of the stalking. Victims describe the progression of effects with eerie similarity across different accounts. First comes curiosity and confusion, then concern followed by fear. The fear becomes anxiety, which becomes paranoia. Paranoia escalates to obsession. The victim's entire mental life becomes consumed by the stalker's presence. Obsession leads to breakdown, insomnia, inability to function, loss of reality testing. Finally comes resignation or surrender. The victim either dies from the sustained stress or walks willingly toward the figure, entering a state from which they never return. Traditional protections show limited effectiveness. Holy water, blessed salt, prayers, and religious symbols might keep El Sombrerón from entering a home, but they don't stop him from waiting outside. He is infinitely patient. He will wait months, years if necessary. Exorcisms fail because he's not possessing anyone, he's simply there. Moving away sometimes works, but other times he follows, appearing in the new location within days. The only consistently reported escape involves another person willingly taking the victim's place, someone offering themselves to be stalked instead. But this requires immense sacrifice, and the transfer doesn't always work. Some families have tried elaborate ceremonies involving shamans, priests, or traditional healers to break the stalking, with mixed results. Success seems tied to understanding why El Sombreron targeted the victim originally, addressing that root cause, but victims often can't or won't explain the reason. El Sombreron represents primal fears, being watched, being followed, being unable to escape. He is the nightmare of the stalking victim, the paranoid's worst fear made manifest. Unlike monsters that can be fought or fled, El Sombreron simply waits. His very existence the attack, his patience infinite, his purpose inscrutable. In rural Colombia, people still warn each other about walking alone at night. Parents tell children to be home before dark. Communities maintain streetlights and encourage walking in groups, not just for protection from human dangers, but for what else might be watching. Because El Sombreron is still there, still selecting victims according to logic only he understands, still beginning his methodical psychological destruction of those he marks. If you're walking alone and hear footsteps that match your pace exactly, look behind you carefully. If you see a small figure with a hat far too large, wearing darkness like a cloak, don't try to approach. Don't try to run. Get to people, to light, to community as quickly as possible. Because once El Sombreron begins following you, once he's chosen you for reasons you may never understand, he will not stop. He will be there tonight, and tomorrow night, and every night after, standing at exactly the same distance, watching from beneath that enormous hat, waiting with the patience of centuries for your mind to break and your feet to carry you toward him. The stalker never tires, the hunter never stops, and somewhere in rural Colombia tonight, someone will look out their window and see that familiar silhouette, small body, massive hat, darkness where the face should be, and they will know their ordeal is beginning. They will know that sleep is lost to them now, that peace is ending, that El Sombreron has marked them, and they will understand with terrible certainty that he will never, ever leave. He is watching still. He is waiting, and he is always, always patient. El Tunche, the whistle in the jungle. One afternoon in May 2011, a group of 4 ecologists were conducting a biodiversity survey deep in the Peruvian Amazon near Iquitos when they heard a whistle. It started distant, melodic, almost beautiful, a series of notes that didn't match any bird call they knew. The team's local guide, a man named Ricardo from a nearby indigenous community, stopped immediately, his face draining of color. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Right now." The ecologists, confused, asked why. The whistle came again, and this time it sounded farther away, as if moving deeper into the jungle. Ricardo grabbed the nearest scientist by the arm, his grip painfully tight. When the whistle sounds far, it means it's coming closer. When it sounds close, it's moving away. That's how El Tunche works. And right now, it's getting closer. The whistle came a third time, even more distant now, barely audible. But Ricardo had already begun running back toward their boat, not waiting to see if the others followed. The scientists, finally understanding the terror in their guide's voice, ran after him. They could hear the whistle behind them now, each iteration sounding farther away but feeling closer, the paradox making their skin crawl and their minds rebel against what their ears reported. They didn't stop running until they reached the river, where Ricardo refused to go back into the jungle for any reason. 2 of the ecologists developed severe fevers that night, delirious and speaking of being followed by something they couldn't see. They survived, but they never returned to the Amazon. They had heard El Tunche, the whistling spirit, and they understood how close they had come to joining the countless people who heard that sound and never made it back. Today I'm going to tell you about one of the Amazon's most feared entities, a spirit that announces itself with sound but defies all logic of distance and direction. El Tunche is reported throughout the western Amazon, particularly in Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia, though variations of the legend exist in Brazil and Bolivia as well. The spirit is known by different names: El Tunchi, El Chulachaki Tunche, sometimes simply the whistle, but the core characteristics remain consistent across cultures and regions. El Tunche is a malevolent forest spirit that manifests primarily as a whistle. The sound is described as melodic, haunting, unlike any natural sound, not quite a bird, not quite human, something in between that the brain struggles to categorize. The whistle consists of several notes in sequence, a tune that people who've heard it say is beautiful and terrifying simultaneously, impossible to forget once heard. But what makes El Tunche truly disturbing is how it violates natural acoustic principles. Normal sounds grow louder as they approach and fainter as they recede. El Tunche operates inversely. When the whistle sounds close, loud, and clear, the spirit is actually far away or moving away from you. When the whistle sounds distant, faint, barely audible, that's when El Tunche is near, perhaps standing just behind you, perhaps reaching out to touch you. This acoustic inversion creates profound disorientation. The human brain is hardwired to judge distance by sound. We instinctively know when something is approaching. El Tunche exploits this instinct, turning it against us, making us feel safe when we're in greatest danger and fearful when we're relatively secure. Victims describe the psychological effect as maddening, their rational mind insisting the distant whistle should mean safety, even as their instinct screams danger. Those who encounter El Tunche face terrible fates. The most common outcome is simply vanishing. People hear the whistle, become disoriented, and are never seen again. Search parties find no bodies, no traces, as if the jungle swallowed them completely. Others are found days later, if they're found at all, often miles from where they disappeared, sometimes alive but insane, speaking incoherently about following or being followed by the whistle, unable to explain where they went or what they saw. Some victims develop mysterious illnesses after hearing the whistle, fevers that won't break, wasting sicknesses that physicians can't diagnose, psychological breaks that manifest as paranoia and terror of forests. Death often follows, though the mechanism is unclear. It's as if being marked by El Tunche begins a process of deterioration that medicine cannot stop. What exactly is El Tunche? Indigenous Amazonian traditions offer multiple explanations. Some say El Tunche is the spirit of someone who died in the jungle under terrible circumstances, lost, starving, killed by animals or accidents, whose soul couldn't find peace. The whistle is their eternal wandering, their confusion manifested as sound, leading others into the same fate they suffered. Others claim El Tunche is an ancient forest spirit, a guardian or predator that existed long before humans, perhaps one of the original beings from creation myths. In these versions, El Tunche protects the deepest jungle, the sacred places humans shouldn't go, using its whistle to lead intruders astray until they die of exposure or fear. Another interpretation holds that El Tunche is a manifestation of the jungle's consciousness, the forest itself made aware and hostile. When humans disrespect the Amazon, taking too much, killing wastefully, violating sacred spaces, the jungle responds through El Tunche, selecting victims to punish or warn. Some shamanic traditions describe El Tunche as a psychopomp, a spirit that guides the dying. Hearing the whistle means death is near, not caused by El Tunche, but announced by it. The spirit comes to lead you to the next world, and the confusion of the inverted whistle represents the disorientation of the dying, the moment when one foot is in life and one in death, when everything familiar becomes strange. Christian missionaries who encountered the legend interpreted El Tunche as demonic, a servant of Satan that hunts souls in the wilderness. Colonial records from the 1600s and 1700s describe priests performing exorcisms and blessings in areas where the whistle was reported, though there's no indication these interventions had any effect. What's consistent across all interpretations is that El Tunche is dangerous, that the whistle should never be followed or investigated, and that hearing it is a sign to leave the area immediately. The spirit shows no mercy, makes no distinctions between indigenous peoples and outsiders. Between good and evil, it hunts according to its own logic, and that logic is alien to human understanding. In 1987, a logging expedition in the Peruvian Amazon led by a man named Gustavo Lopez experienced an encounter with El Tunche that became legendary among river communities. Lopez's company was working in a remote area near the Ucayali River, cutting valuable hardwoods from primary forest. The operation employed 23 men loggers, equipment operators, and support staff. The expedition had been warned by local communities not to work in that particular area. The forest was old, sacred, protected by spirits. But Lopez dismissed these warnings as superstition meant to protect competitors' access to valuable timber. He pushed his operation deeper into the forest than any commercial logging had gone before. On the third week of work, the crew began hearing the whistle. It started as distant, barely noticeable, easily dismissed as a bird or imagination. But it returned, always in the late afternoon, always from the same general direction deeper in the forest, away from their camp and the river. Some workers became uneasy, mentioning El Tunche, but Lopez ridiculed them, threatened to dock pay for anyone who talked about ghosts and spirits. The whistle grew more frequent. Workers heard it while cutting trees, while operating equipment, while preparing meals. Each time, it sounded distant, unthreatening, but the men grew increasingly nervous. They knew the legend, a distant whistle, meant proximity. 3 workers quit, hiking back to the river rather than continue. Lopez called them cowards and hired replacements from men desperate enough for work to ignore the warnings. Then the disappearances began. A young logger named Marco went into the forest to relieve himself and didn't return. They searched for hours, calling his name, finding nothing. His trail simply ended 50 meters from camp. No signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of what happened. The whistle sounded that evening, distant and mocking. 2 days later, another man vanished during his work shift. His chainsaw was found running, lying on the ground next to a partially cut tree. The man himself was gone. Again, no trace. The whistle came that night, seeming to circle the camp, always sounding far away but feeling oppressively close. Lopez finally acknowledged something was wrong, but he refused to abandon expensive equipment and valuable timber. He instituted a buddy system. No one goes anywhere alone. He hired a local shaman to bless the camp and perform protective rituals. The shaman, an elderly man named Don Julio, performed the ceremonies but told Lopez the blessing wouldn't work. They had gone too deep, cut trees they shouldn't have touched, ignored too many warnings. El Tunche had marked them, and the spirit would not stop until it was satisfied. The third disappearance happened despite the buddy system. 2 workers, Roberto and Andres, were working together when Roberto suddenly stood up and walked into the forest. Andres called after him, but Roberto didn't respond, didn't look back, just walked steadily into the dense vegetation. Andres ran after him, shouting, and heard the whistle loud, close, as if just meters away. Following the logic of the legend, this should have meant El Tunche was far away, that Roberto was safe. But Andres couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness, the sensation of something massive and malevolent very near. He ran back to camp for help. The search party found Roberto 2 hours later, sitting at the base of a massive ceiba tree 5 kilometers from where he'd disappeared. He was alive but unresponsive, staring at nothing, not reacting to voices or touch. When they tried to move him, he began screaming not words, just raw sound, pure terror. They had to physically carry him back to camp. He never spoke coherently again. When evacuated to Iquitos, doctors found nothing physically wrong, but Roberto remained catatonic, occasionally whispering about the whistle that lies and the thing behind the sound. That night, the entire camp heard the whistle. It surrounded them, coming from every direction simultaneously, sounding miles away but feeling as if the source was within the camp itself. The sound continued for 3 hours, that same melodic sequence repeated endlessly, driving men to cover their ears, to pray, to weep. When dawn came and the whistle finally stopped, Lopez found his crew in a state of mass hysteria. 7 men refused to stay another moment, hiking out even though it meant abandoning their pay. The rest demanded immediate evacuation. Lopez had finally had enough. The expedition was abandoned within 48 hours. Equipment worth tens of thousands of dollars was left to rust in the jungle. No one was willing to go back for it. When a recovery team was sent 3 months later, they found the camp completely overgrown, as if vegetation had accelerated its growth. The equipment was there, but they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of the forest actively pushing them out. They heard the whistle, distant and terrible, and left without recovering anything. 4 of the men who worked that expedition died within a year: accidents, illness, suicide. Others reported continuing to hear the whistle in their sleep, waking in terror, unable to return to forest work. Roberto remained institutionalized until his death in 2003, never regaining his sanity. Lopez himself developed a heart condition and died in 1992, though those who knew him said he died of fear, that he could never escape the memory of those 3 hours when the whistle surrounded his camp. Communities that live in El Tunche territory have developed strict protocols for survival. These rules are taught to children from early age and reinforced through stories of those who ignored them and vanished. If you hear the whistle, stop everything immediately and assess the sound. If it sounds close and loud, you may be safe, but you should still leave the area quickly and calmly. If it sounds distant or faint, you are in immediate danger. Run toward your camp, your boat, any other humans, as fast as possible. Never run alone into the forest, even if fleeing the whistle that plays into El Tunche's trap. Run toward safety, toward people, toward the river. Never try to locate the source of the whistle. Never call out to it or respond to it in any way. Never follow it, no matter how curious you are or how compelling the sound. The whistle is bait, lure, trap. Engaging with it in any way gives El Tunche power over you. If the whistle begins sounding from multiple directions, or if it seems to be circling you, you are already in El Tunche's grasp. Your only hope is to remain completely still, pray to whatever you believe in, and wait for the sound to stop. Movement at this point is fatal. You'll become disoriented, run deeper into the jungle, become lost. Some survivors report that remaining absolutely motionless and mentally reciting prayers broke El Tunche's hold, allowing them to escape when the whistle finally moved on. Traditional protections include tobacco smoke. El Tunche is said to be repelled by it, and certain plant materials carried as charms. Shamans can perform protective ceremonies before entering deep jungle, though these offer no guarantee. Traveling in groups provides some safety, as El Tunche seems to prefer isolated victims. Making continuous noise, talking, singing, drumming may keep the spirit at distance, though this also attracts other dangers in the forest. Most important is respecting the jungle. Those who enter the Amazon with humility, who ask permission of the forest spirits, who take only what they need and show gratitude, are less likely to encounter El Tunche. The spirit hunts the arrogant, the greedy, those who treat the jungle as something to be conquered or exploited. It's both guardian and predator, enforcing the ancient law that the Amazon belongs to itself, not to humanity. El Tunche remains actively reported throughout the Amazon. A 2019 incident involved a group of illegal gold miners in Ecuador who all fled their operation after 3 nights of hearing the whistle. They left equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, refusing to return even for it. 2 of the miners were later found wandering near a town 50 kilometers from their site, unable to explain how they got there, claiming they had been following the whistle away from their camp and suddenly found themselves on a road. Scientific expeditions regularly encounter the phenomenon. Researchers who spend extended time in deep Amazon rainforest almost all report hearing unexplained whistles at some point. While many dismiss these as misidentified bird calls or auditory hallucinations caused by isolation, others admit the sounds don't match any known animal, and behave in ways that contradict normal acoustics, appearing to come from multiple locations, shifting position impossibly fast, creating the uncanny effect of sounding distant but feeling near. Indigenous communities continue to take El Tunche seriously. Shamans perform ceremonies to protect travelers. Parents warn children. No one jokes about the whistle. It's understood as real danger, whether supernatural or natural, something that has killed too many people to dismiss. El Tunche represents the Amazon's fundamental alienness to human perception. We evolved to understand certain patterns. Predators are loud, safety is quiet, distance increases with fading sound. The Amazon operates by different rules, and El Tunche embodies this difference. The whistle that lies, the distance that inverts, the beauty that kills, these are the jungle's truths. In the deep Amazon, where satellite phones don't work and rescue is days away, where you can walk for weeks without seeing another human, where the forest decides who lives and who dies, El Tunche is sovereign. The whistle is its voice, its warning, its invitation to join the others who went too deep, stayed too long, disrespected what should be honored. Listen carefully in the Amazon twilight. When howler monkeys fall silent and parrots stop their chatter, when the thousand sounds of the jungle pause as if the forest itself is holding its breath, that's when you might hear it. A whistle, beautiful and strange, melodic and wrong. And you'll have to decide instantly, is it near or far? Are you safe or about to die? Is that distant sound actually close? Or is your mind playing tricks because you know the legend? But by the time you're asking these questions, it may already be too late. El Tunche has marked you, has begun the process of leading you away from safety, away from sanity, away from life itself. The whistle will sound again and again, each time making less sense, each time pulling you deeper into confusion until you don't remember where you are or which direction leads home. And in the morning, your companions will search. They'll call your name. They'll find your tracks leading into impossible terrain, stopping abruptly as if you vanished mid-step. They'll hear the whistle, distant and mocking, and they'll know what took you. They'll leave, marking you as another victim of El Tunche, another voice added to the eternal whistle that echoes through the Amazon, leading the next victim deeper into the green darkness. The whistle is blowing now. Is it near? Is it far? Can you tell the difference anymore? El Tunche is patient. El Tunche is always hunting, and in the Amazon, the whistle never truly stops. El Mohan, the river devil. One evening in August 2004, a fisherman named Diego Ramirez was checking his nets along the Magdalena River in Colombia's Tolima region when he saw a woman standing waist-deep in the water about 50 meters upstream. She was beautiful, with long, dark hair that flowed down her back, and she appeared to be bathing in the golden light of sunset. Diego called out to warn her about the dangerous current, but she didn't respond. As he paddled his canoe closer, he noticed something wrong about her movements, too fluid, too graceful, not quite human. Then she turned to look at him, and Diego's blood froze. The face was masculine, covered in tangled hair and beard, eyes that glowed yellow in the fading light. What he had thought was a woman's long hair was actually moss and river plants growing from the creature's head and body. The thing smiled, revealing teeth filed to points, and dove beneath the water. Diego frantically paddled toward shore, but something grabbed his canoe from below, spinning it violently. He heard laughter deep, wet, echoing across the water. His nets, which had been full of fish moments before, were now shredded and empty. Diego made it to shore, abandoning his canoe and running to his village. When he returned at dawn with others, his canoe was found overturned a kilometer downstream, its bottom carved with deep claw marks that went through the wood. He had encountered El Mohan, the river spirit who has terrorized Colombia's waterways for centuries, stealing women, destroying boats, and drowning those who disrespect his domain. Today I'm going to tell you about one of Colombia's most feared supernatural entities, a creature that rules the rivers with ancient power and terrible hunger. El Mohan, also called El Poira, El Muan, or simply the River Devil, is reported throughout Colombia, particularly along major rivers like the Magdalena, Cauca, Sinu, and their tributaries. The legend has roots in pre-Columbian indigenous beliefs, later syncretized with Spanish colonial folklore about water spirits and devils. The creature is consistently described as massive, standing between 6 and 8 feet tall, with a body that's simultaneously human and monstrous. His most distinctive feature is his hair long, wild, tangled with moss, river plants, and mud, growing not just from his head but covering much of his body. Some accounts describe it as dreadlocks that reach his waist or lower, constantly dripping with water even when he's on land. His beard is equally long and matted, often described as hiding much of his face. His skin is dark, sometimes described as greenish or covered in scales like a fish. His hands end in long claws, perfect for catching fish or ripping apart boats. His feet are webbed in some accounts, hoofed in others, or simply massive and clawed. His eyes glow yellow, gold, or green, reflecting light like a crocodile's. His teeth are sharp, filed to points, or naturally predatory. The smell that accompanies him is overwhelming rotting vegetation, stagnant water, dead fish, the smell of the river's darkest depths. El Mohan lives in deep pools, underwater caves, beneath waterfalls, or in the tangled roots of trees that hang over rivers. He is master of the aquatic realm, able to control fish, summon floods, calm or enrage waters at will. Some traditions say he can control river dolphins, caimans, and anacondas, sending them to do his bidding. Others claim he can command weather, bringing rain or drought as it suits him. But El Mohan's most notorious characteristic is his obsession with women. He is said to be irresistibly attracted to beautiful women, especially those who come to the river to bathe or wash clothes. He watches them from beneath the water, choosing his favorites, then kidnaps them, dragging them to his underwater lair. Some stories say he keeps them as wives or slaves, others that he drowns them immediately, still others that he transforms them into river spirits like himself. Women who disappear near rivers are often said to have been taken by El Mohan, their bodies never recovered because they're held in his underwater kingdom. El Mohan's origins trace to the indigenous Muisca, Quimbaya, Tolima, and other pre-Columbian peoples who inhabited Colombia's river valleys. These cultures revered rivers as sacred, home to powerful spirits that could grant prosperity or bring destruction. The Muisca had legends of water beings they called Mohanes, shamans, or spirit beings with power over water and weather. When Spanish colonizers arrived in the 1500s, they encountered these beliefs and interpreted them through their own folklore about water devils, river demons, and creatures that drowned Christians and stole women. The legend evolved, absorbing elements of European water spirits like kelpies and nixies, while retaining its indigenous core. Catholic priests warned their converts that El Mohan was demonic, a servant of Satan who punished those who strayed from Christian teachings. But indigenous communities maintained that El Mohan was neither good nor evil in Christian terms. He was a force of nature, the river's consciousness, demanding respect and offerings. Those who approached rivers with humility, who asked permission before fishing or bathing, who left tobacco or food as offerings, could coexist with El Mohan. Those who took too much, who polluted the water, who showed arrogance or disrespect, faced his wrath. Colonial records document numerous disappearances attributed to El Mohan. A 1,643 report from a Jesuit missionary describes how a Spanish soldier who was abusing indigenous river workers was found drowned, his body covered in strange claw marks. A 1,711 account tells of an entire boat of travelers disappearing on the Magdalena River after they ignored warnings not to travel during certain lunar phases when El Mohan was said to be most active. The legend persisted through independence, through modernization, through the 20th century. Even today, in an era of motorboats and river commerce, El Mohan remains feared along Colombia's waterways. His domain has shrunk. Pollution, dams, and heavy boat traffic have driven him from some areas, but in the quieter stretches, where the river still runs wild and deep, people know he is watching. In 1976, the village of Ambalema on the Magdalena River experienced an incident that became legendary throughout the Tolima region. A young woman named Maria Isabel Vargas, 19 years old and known for her beauty, went to the river one afternoon to wash clothes. She went to the same spot she'd used countless times, a gentle beach area where village women traditionally did their washing. Several other women were present that day. They reported that Maria Isabel had been singing as she worked, kneeling at the water's edge, scrubbing clothes against the rocks. Around 3 p.m., the other women moved to a shaded area further upstream. Maria Isabel called out that she would join them shortly. She just had a few more pieces to wash. 15 minutes later, when the women looked back, Maria Isabel was gone. Her clothes basket sat on the shore, half full. Her sandals were neatly placed where she'd left them. But Maria Isabel had vanished. The women called for her, searched the immediate area, and then ran to the village for help. A search party formed immediately. They scoured both banks of the river for kilometers. They dragged the shallow areas. Experienced fishermen dove in the deeper pools. They found nothing, no body, no signs of struggle, no evidence of what had happened. Maria Isabel had simply disappeared from a beach in broad daylight with other people nearby. The village elders immediately suspected El Mohan. Maria Isabel had been warned by her grandmother never to go to the river alone, never to bathe or wash at dawn or dusk when El Mohan was most active, never to sing near the water because the sound attracted his attention. Maria Isabel had been singing. She had been alone, even if only for minutes, and the spot where she vanished was near a deep pool known to be one of El Mohan's favorite haunts. 3 days later, one of Maria Isabel's dresses was found snagged on roots 5 kilometers downstream, in an area of rapids where nothing should have survived. The dress was torn and muddy, but not degraded as it should have been after days in the water. Wrapped in the fabric was a handful of long black hair, but when examined, the hair was coarse, strange, more like plant fiber than human hair, and it smelled of river bottom and decay. A week after the disappearance, fishermen reported seeing a woman in white standing on a sandbar in the middle of the river at midnight. She appeared to be crying, reaching toward the shore. When they tried to approach, a massive figure rose from the water beside her, a huge, man-like creature covered in hair and river plants, his eyes glowing in their lantern light. The figure put one clawed hand on the woman's shoulder, and both vanished beneath the water. The fishermen insisted the woman had been Maria Isabel. The sightings continued sporadically for months. People claimed to see Maria Isabel in the river at night, always accompanied by the hulking figure of El Mohan, always just out of reach. Her family performed masses, hired shamans to perform rescue rituals, begged the river to return their daughter. Nothing worked. Then, nearly a year after her disappearance, Maria Isabel simply walked out of the river one morning. She emerged from the water in front of stunned fishermen. Her clothes waterlogged but intact, her hair grown long and tangled with river plants. She walked past the fishermen without speaking, made her way to her family's house, and locked herself in her room. For 3 days, she didn't speak, didn't eat, just stared at the walls with the blank expression of someone who has seen things that broke something fundamental in their mind. When she finally spoke, her family wished she hadn't. She described being pulled underwater by hands that were not hands, taken to caves that were not caves, held in a place where water and air existed together impossibly, where time moved differently. She had experienced what felt like years in that underwater realm. She spoke of El Mohan not as a monster, but as a being of terrible power and alien thought patterns. He had not hurt her physically, she said, but had kept her because he was lonely, because he collected beautiful things, because in his ageless existence she was a momentary treasure. She described others there, women from different eras, some reduced to bones that still moved. Others transformed into half-water creatures themselves, all trapped in El Mohan's domain. He had let her go, Maria Isabel said, not out of mercy but boredom, or perhaps as a message, a reminder that he could take anyone, anytime, that the river belonged to him, and humans existed in his world only by his tolerance. She begged her family to move away from Ambalima, away from any river, as far from water as they could get. Maria Isabel lived until 1998, but she was never the same. She never married, never had children, never went near water. She wouldn't even drink from a glass without someone else tasting it first. In her final years, she was found sometimes speaking to empty air, having conversations with someone no one else could see. Her last words, whispered to the priest giving her final rites, were, "He's calling me back. I can hear him in the water. Tell everyone to stay away from the river. He's always watching. He never forgets." River communities have developed extensive knowledge of how to coexist with El Mohan. These rules vary by region but share common elements that have kept people relatively safe for generations. Never bathe, fish, or approach the river during dawn or dusk. These are El Mohan's hours, when he moves between his underwater realm and the surface. Avoid full moon nights, which amplify his power. Women should never go to the river alone, never wash clothes at isolated spots, never sing or call out near the water. Sound attracts his attention. Long hair should be tied up and hidden. El Mohan is drawn to flowing hair, seeing it as similar to his own. Before fishing, leave an offering. Tobacco is traditional, but aguardiente, sugarcane, liquor, coca leaves, or food also work. Speak to the river respectfully, asking permission to take fish, promising not to waste what you catch. Never boast about your catch or take more than you need. Never urinate or spit in the river. It's disrespectful and angers El Mohan. Certain areas are known as El Mohan's territory: deep pools, areas under waterfalls, stretches where boats frequently capsize or people disappear. These should be avoided entirely. If you must pass through such areas, do so quickly, quietly, while praying or mentally showing respect. Never mock or challenge El Mohan. Even as a joke, he hears everything said near his waters and has a long memory for disrespect. If you see El Mohan, never make eye contact. Look away immediately and leave the area as quickly as possible without panicking or running. Sudden movement may trigger his predatory instincts. If he calls to you and he can perfectly mimic human voices, never answer, never go toward the sound. If you hear beautiful singing from the water, resist the compulsion to investigate its El Mohan's lure. Women who catch El Mohan's attention should immediately cut their hair short, stop bathing in the river entirely, and have a protective ceremony performed by a priest or shaman. Men who anger him should leave the region. El Mohan's vengeance is patient but certain. He will drown you eventually, whether by overturning your boat, pulling you under while you swim, or causing you to accidentally fall in during a moment of carelessness. El Mohan continues to be blamed for disappearances and accidents along Colombia's rivers. In 2015, when a tourist boat capsized on the Magdalena River, killing 8 people, locals whispered it was El Mohan's doing. The boat had been carrying a wedding party that was drinking, singing loudly, and showing disrespect to the river. Official investigation blamed equipment failure, but those who lived by the river knew better. A 2018 incident involved a young woman who went missing while swimming with friends near Honda, Tolima. Her body was found 3 weeks later, trapped in underwater roots in a pool known as one of El Mohan's haunts. The coroner found no water in her lungs, she hadn't drowned, and no other cause of death could be determined. Her friends reported that just before she disappeared, she had been staring at something in the water, had started swimming toward it despite them calling her back. The last thing she said was, "He's so beautiful," though none of them saw what she was looking at. Environmental changes have affected El Mohan's territory. Pollution, dams, and heavy river traffic have driven him from some traditional areas. But locals say he's adapted, that he now inhabits the quieter tributaries, the protected areas. the places where rivers still run as they have for thousands of years. Some even suggest that increased flooding and river disasters in recent decades are El Mohan's revenge for what humans have done to his realm. Indigenous communities maintain that El Mohan is essential to river health, that he is the spirit that keeps the ecosystem balanced. When he leaves an area, they say, the fish die, the water becomes poisoned, disasters increase. He is both threat and guardian, dangerous to individuals but necessary for the river's survival. El Mohan represents humanity's complex relationship with rivers, our dependence on them, our fear of them, our tendency to take from them while forgetting they are not ours to control. He is the river's power made manifest, the reminder that water gives life but also takes it, that nature demands respect, not as a quaint tradition but as survival necessity. In Colombia, people still leave offerings at the river's edge. Women still cover their hair before washing clothes. Fishermen still ask permission before casting nets. Not because they're superstitious or primitive, but because El Mohan is real in the way that matters, real in the drownings he causes, real in the women he takes, real in the fear he instills that keeps people respectful and careful around dangerous waters. When you see a beautiful stretch of Colombian river, calm and inviting, remember that beauty is deceptive. Beneath the surface, in the deep pools and underwater caves, El Mohan watches. His long hair flows with the current. His yellow eyes scan the banks for the unwary, the disrespectful, the beautiful. His claws are ready to grab ankles, to overturn boats, to drag victims to his kingdom where time moves differently and escape is impossible. The river is his. It has always been his. And if you forget that, if you take too much or disrespect too deeply, if you're unlucky enough to catch his ancient, hungry attention, the water will claim you. You'll join the others in his collection, the countless souls trapped in the depths, held by a being who was old when the first humans came to these rivers and who will remain long after the last human has gone. Listen to the river's voice. When it whispers, El Mohan is near. When it roars, he is angry. And when it goes silent, when the fish stop jumping and the birds stop calling, that's when you should run. Because the silence means he's about to surface, about to reach with those massive clawed hands toward whatever has drawn his terrible, patient, eternal attention. El Mohan is waiting. The river remembers, and the deep pools keep their secrets forever.
We made it out of this one, but the darkness runs deep. If you think you can handle it, check out the other cases on the channel. Don't risk losing the signal. Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. The next investigation is starting now.